It's been some time now, a few weeks since I've. Oh, it's okay, puppy. I'm here with my Luigi right now. I just woke him up when I started speaking. Anyway, it's been some weeks now since my last journal entry. I discussed about this with my therapist this week, that for some reason, things that help me, that keep me grounded, like listening to music, watching my favorite TV shows, reading a good book, dealing into specific topics about life and the nature of the universe, things like that. That when something big comes along, it kind of just drains me completely, and I lose focus, and I become untethered, begin to become more irritable. I forget to do self-care. The last case of this was, well, I think I made it in my journal entry. The father of my in-law aunt passed away while I was in Mexico, and that kind of really threw me for a loop. Sorry, closing the window. Just don't want all the noise from outside. So he passed away. My baby. He's always looking out for me. This time in Mexico kind of did a number on him, so he's been extra clingy since I've been back. It's okay, puppy. Alright, so while I was in Mexico, the parent of my aunt had passed away, and leading up to that, she had told me a few times how basically she was in the same boat as I was in regards to her dad, that she was the main care provider for him, and how overwhelming it was, and that sometimes she just needed to get out to be able to kind of do that self-care. And it reminded me a lot of what was going on with me and my mom. And it was actually Mother's Day when I got the news that I had reached out to her, told her good morning, and she tells me that her father had passed away. That kind of just blew me away. And so in the therapy session this week, I mentioned to my therapist that, I had encountered something along the lines that explained this whole situation. About a year or two ago, I had run into a content creator on TikTok that had explained that empaths like me tend to empathize with people to the degree that in a way we actually become them, if that makes any sense. So in the case of my aunt, what had happened in this particular situation was that I literally was living her pain in that moment, because that has been a constant thought for me for these past few years, that especially since my mom made a decision that she doesn't want a third kidney transplant, and given her physical condition, she cannot have one. She will most likely not survive the surgery. So bottom line, she has basically said this is the last moments that she's going to be enjoying with me in life. So knowing that the typical kidney lasts about, I think they said 23 years, and she's already at 28. She's 5 years past the expectancy of any kidney transplant, or I think any other kind of organ. So we're basically on borrowed time. So when this happened with my aunt, it just kind of knocked me on my ass, because I'm like, everything that I was seeing her go through is like, I kept thinking, this is what I'm going to be going through in a couple of weeks, a couple of months, a couple of years. I don't know, because I don't know when it's going to happen. And so when I was speaking to my therapist, just came up that um, a lot of the times when this kind of situation happens, that I'm doing very well, I'm making progress in life, I'm putting myself together, because that was my main mission of coming back home after my life fell apart after COVID. That I was going to rebuild myself. It took some time to come to the realization, basically, because I already had touched upon the topic in different ways, how my upbringing had affected me in such ways that, I didn't have the cognitive skills, much less the intellectual, the EQ to be able to process normal day things. That, like many other trauma survivors, I was on a default way of surviving. That for me it was kind of like the show must go on, that axiom, that whatever was going on in life, I kept my shit together, quote unquote. And a lot of people have told me that in the face of any crisis, I was always self-composed. But the odd thing, and it's apparently it's not only unique to me, but to many other people like me, that um, when certain inconveniences would come up in normal life, we would fall apart. And so I remember in a conversation, I mentioned this in a different journal entry, that one day when I was going on my way to visit my niece's graduation up in Stockton, I believe, I was commenting to my mom that growing up, because, she opted to come to the U.S. because of her health, and the family just kind of dispersed everywhere, and it was just me and her for the first 10 years of my life, that that created a big impact on me, especially not having a father there, not having family to rely on, not knowing whether she was going to pass away at any moment, because at some level I knew that, and the popular media of the time did a horrible number on me. At that time, orphan stories were a big thing, and my young mind couldn't process any of that, but I internalized all of that, and just kind of having to grow up earlier than I should have, you know, um, did a big number on me. That growing up, I didn't have the tools that I needed to deal with everyday things. That I was able to suppress a lot of stuff, but it only caused like me bottling up my emotions. And at some point, at the most inopportune times, I would blow up at people, and it got so bad that in a way of me trying to protect myself, trying to kind of keep um, those boundaries, because basically that's what it was, keeping boundaries, keep myself safe from people's just chaotic stuff that had nothing to do with me. I opted for the easiest way to basically just kind of be rude, dismissive, and even to the point of being cruel, just to keep my own sanity. But the way that I was doing it was counterproductive. So, with all that in mind, as I progressed in my healing, at some point from the time that COVID happened in 2020 to now, I realized one thing, that emotionally speaking, I had deep wounds. And what do you do with wounds? Well, first you have to clean them out, take out all the whatever it be, maybe a debris, if you have some sort of shrapnel like a bullet or something. So emotionally speaking, I have to take that out first, dealing with the past traumas, which in and of itself I came to realize caused additional problems, because when I was talking about these, and my manner of speaking is a very clinical way of thinking things, it didn't matter. A lot of people that were hearing this were taking offense to it because they thought that I was blaming them. I didn't realize that I should have been coupling this with the other part of that I understood that they too were affected by the same things, because the things that, like, what prompted my mom to take the decisions that she did in regards to my upbringing, were were mostly caused by her own traumas, how her mother raised her, and the inner conflict between her mother and her father, and the eventual, consequences of that. So that impacted her, and her seeing everything happening in her family, how it affected her, and how she started to look at the world and act and interact with the world, and in addition, how also it shaped her way of raising me, in a way of trying to make me quote unquote stronger. And in reality, for me, that was a trauma in itself. That, looking at all these things, I kept realizing, that my trauma wasn't done on purpose. It was just a consequence of just surviving. And that, I needed to deal with all that stuff. And I needed to do it privately because it already had blown up in my face, more than once, right? And trying to, I guess, get the help, the understanding, the love and support from my family, I came off as if I was blaming, and in some respect, I think I was blaming them because at that point, I hadn't, understood that it wasn't entirely their fault either. They were also, processing their way of looking at the world through the lens of their own traumas. And so going back to the metaphor about the wound, at some point, through one of my meditations with marijuana, and I have used it in that clinical sense, not being supervised by anybody, but I realized something about the ancients that, for lack of a better word, they were using these to connect, with themselves and ultimately with the divine, by stripping away the layer of our consciousness that kind of filters out, the natural brainstorming process of our minds that allow us to kind of connect deeper with issues without being attached. So, I realized in one of these, meditation sessions that my trauma was like this wound, and by the way, I do not recommend doing, these type of meditation sessions, by yourself. It will cause a lot of, situations that can get out of control. If you are not prepared, it can actually, create a cycle, a downward spiral. So I have to caution that, because there was a few times where I was kind of going through that, but by grace of God, I somehow was redirected. Let's just put it that way. So in one of these sessions, I came up with this concept of, the trauma being this wound. So I figured, that I needed to clean out the wound. And not only that, but, in some instances, if you've seen any of the, ER kind of, dramas out there, sometimes you have to even cut out, unhealthy tissue that has been already, necrotized because of the wound. And so I realized that I was going to go through that too, and sure enough, I did do that. Just talking about it right now, the whole point of me talking out loud about realizing where some of my traumas came about caused that additional pain, caused additional issues that, that I could have saved myself, but in some way it was kind of necessary, because had I left that quote unquote alone, it would have continued to grow or manifest in other ways. So, I just went in realizing that there was going to be a lot of pain in processing all this trauma and growing and quote unquote fixing myself. But now that for all intents and purposes, on the other side, because I'm very close to, it's weird, because my original goal was just to get back to a state, like resetting myself to a previous state that I had existed in. But doing all this past work over these past 6 years, especially, driven in parts of it because of a situationship with this wonderful fellow that I met at work that, by the way, gives me even more um, inclination to praise God, because God had not prepared me for that years before, because he sent me a dream that I found out through. And by the way, I have these type of prophetic dreams, which I need to create another entry for that, because it's not really prophetic. I think it's something else that's going on, an evolutionary thing. But anyway, point that aside. Before my life collapsed, I had a prophetic dream, I think about a year, almost 2 years before, that was very interesting. And in a nutshell, it was basically experiencing sun during a time that I knew was nighttime. In multiple dreams leading up to the collapse of my life, I had dreams where um, I dreamt that literally at midnight there was the sun outside. When I went to find out what it was, I came to know that it meant that a significant, massive, life altering, world upside down type of change was going to happen to me. And sure enough, 2020 proved to be that event. As I put in several journal entries before, there was a time when I considered taking my own life. And if it hadn't been for Luigi, my dog, the one who's right here next to me right now, I think I would have succeeded in taking my own life. But hadn't it been for that event, the main catalyst that pushed me to kind of better myself was this great guy that I met at a place that given my training, my education, and everything, I wouldn't have never ever worked there anymore, because I was already working in IT. I was making $150,000 a year, and that was my life. But had I not chosen to go into a restaurant and basically blow up my whole life, well, COVID had to do a lot with it too. I don't know what the situation would have been had COVID not been around, but a combination of both, my decision to change my life path and COVID hitting at the same time, wouldn't have put me in the place to be around this guy who was, for all intents and purposes, my soulmate. And I still believe that, that we're going to be together, as delusional as that may seem. Because right now we've been apart for almost 2 years, and what complicates things is that, as far as I understand, he identifies as straight. But there was a lot of situations, and you can see that in previous journal entries, that there was a connection there. And I don't know if it's going to happen or not, or maybe he was just preparation for my actual soulmate. I don't know. But he, like the saying goes, people come for a moment, a day, a week, or a lifetime, or something like that. He could have been a reason in my life, for appearing in my life. I don't know yet. That story is not complete yet. What I do know is that because he proved to be the closest version of my ideal mate, and I knew where I was, psychologically speaking, that I wasn't ready for a relationship, that I have too many toxic traits, and that whoever it was that I would end up with, it would be another situation of right person, wrong time. He just reminded me of a previous person that I was really in sync with. And I actually saw myself making a life with that individual as well. But the timing was so off that I hurt him really badly in one of the situations where, I bottle the emotions, bottle it, and then I would explode. And I hurt him deeply, and I know that, and I recognize that now. And with this guy too, I believe I did the same thing. but not in the sense of hurting him with specific words, but more in self-protection of taking my energy away. I hurt him, and that's because of his own traumas. But given all that aside, I realized that I initially I started off doing this for the other person, to be a better mate. And I had already thought about that even before this fella, but he made it crystal clear that I needed to do this. Before that, I had encountered, like I said, this other individual before him that had made it crystal clear to me that whether, and at that time I had actually applied it to him because I always felt like I was walking on eggshells around this fellow, but I loved him. We synced very well. But I did cross my mind that, if we formed a family and we had children, he would be very toxic to our children. And later on, when I met the last fellow, whose story is not over yet, I hope, I realized the same thing, but for me, that whether it was his children, because he actually was, I don't know if married or was just together with her, but he has two children. And so I figured that, whether it was with his children or with him, there was going to be clashes because of how I was still processing life. So I needed to do that work to be a better mate and a better parent. But then eventually, especially after I decided to leave the company because it was just getting very overwhelming being around him, I couldn't trust myself to be around him. We had these ups and downs that was not good for either of us. We were basically acting like kids. But I ended up leaving, and eventually, as I was trying to forget him, because that was also doing damage to me a lot. I mean, there was a lot of nights where I was crying over him. I mean, I cried over the previous guy that I also mentioned, that I had a falling out with. But with this one, it seemed like it was 10 times worse. Initially, the first year, I think I was crying at least 2, 3 times, 4 times a week. Because, I couldn't believe, I was beating myself. I couldn't believe that I had basically done it again, that I had found an unavailable guy. And number one, I had violated my most sacred rule not to get involved with a straight guy. And there I did it. I allowed myself to be involved with a straight guy, to make something messy. I mean, thank God that we never got physical, otherwise, physical as in romantic, because I think that would have messed me up even more. We never touched, we never held hands, we never kissed, nothing. And I think had I allowed myself to cross that line, I don't know, maybe even Luigi wouldn't have saved me. But eventually, after processing all that stuff, how everything fell apart and how, whether it was him or another person, I wanted to be a better person. It eventually grew little by little as I became closer and closer to God again. And I started to discover more and more things about myself, and in the process learning that gratitude to God and to life, the universe, whatever you want to believe in, just kind of started to make me feel a little bit different about myself and how I fit into everything, my perspective about myself and everything else, which eventually started to lead to things like, more appreciation for myself. Before, let's put it like, I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. It wasn't that it was shame for something I did explicitly, but more along the lines that I didn't like myself. I think at some level I was kind of blaming myself for being unlovable. But as RuPaul says, you can't love anybody else unless you love yourself. I don't know how the the exact wording goes, but basically it came down to that I needed to work on myself, love myself more and more, not be obsessed with myself, but love myself honestly and truly, in the sense that I was proactively taking better care of myself. Um, with that, at some point during this transformation, um, I added additional weight to it by coming to the conclusion that, and it's very true, because when you start to um, value yourself on a psychological level, love yourself, you start to do things for yourself, like take care of yourself physically and emotionally, and interpersonally. You start to look at the different aspects of yourself, and be like, well, is this benefiting me? Is this me showing love to myself? And as time passed, I came coming back to the same conclusion that some things were not good for me, that they were just kind of coping mechanisms that were actually counterproductive. So now, I'm able to speak about these things more and more, and as I'm doing the work, I take more time to reflect and, to kind of simmer and, just kind of enjoy the flavor of whatever's going on, if that makes any sense. I'm taking, life literally a bite at a time. Because otherwise, you literally gag, as they say. But, like right now, going back to that, to the analogy of the open wound, I just keep thinking that maybe that's part of the healing process too, that you need to let it air out, because I think that's part of treating a wound as well, that when you're changing the bandages, you let it breathe for a little bit, and then you do whatever else you need to do, and then you rebandage it. And so I think right now, emotionally speaking, I'm kind of starting to see the what do you call the scars just set in now. Before you can kind of imagine, because I did imagine to the respect that in regards to people, why I kind of was like ew people kind of person, that it was in this analogy, this is how I was watching it, that it is a form of self-victimization, which again is also kind of a non-conductive, a counterproductive way of loving yourself, of coping with life, of being in the victim role. I saw myself as a burn victim, that I couldn't allow people to touch me because it hurt to be touched. Many times I encountered, before my life collapsed, that I rather just people not help me because they made things worse. And it wasn't that they made things worse, it was that I was just so used to doing things on my own, because a lot of times growing up, I really didn't have anybody to run to, that either they were too busy, they didn't care, they had no knowledge of my type of situation, so they had no clue how to help me, or any other, or they were going through their own shit too. Yeah, simple as that too. So a lot of times I found myself having to figure things out myself. And eventually, and I realized up to this year barely, that a lot of the reason why I was so resistant people trying to help me and trying to quote unquote correct me was because I was kind of annoyed that, well, where were you when I needed this information the first time? I taught myself how to do this, so now you have the damn nerve to come and try to correct me? That kind of attitude. But as I'm growing, I'm looking at these type of things, and it just falls back to that same wound analogy, that, the wound is so big that it's, you have to be patient with it. You have to do the work, meaning you have to get in there, clean out whatever you need to clean out. It'll regrow again sometimes if it's that big, the infection. So you need to do the medicines like I've been doing on and off here and there. The self-care, like watching my favorite TV shows and movies and things like that heal my soul. For me, it's Two Broke Girls. That's one of my favorites. Mom, which talks about a lot of 12 steps and dealing with all this inner conflict, and other shows. But those are the main ones that my go-tos that I go to when I'm in a crappy place, or listening to music that is just kind of almost angelic that fills me with joy. Or delving into topics that are more than just the everyday type of topics. But as I mentioned at the beginning, there's still this situation where something happens that it knocks me on my ass, and the self-care goes out the window. So that's what I've been working on this past year, of trying to stabilize that no matter what the hell is going on, because that's one of my goals, that no matter how crappy I feel emotionally or physically, that I'm able to still articulate my needs, desires, and boundaries, instead of just getting exasperated with the other individual and blowing off on them, or snapping, or whatever it may be. And on the flip side, also keeping up with the self-care, because like I mentioned, that's one of my things. When I'm in a bad place for whatever reason, I grow resistant to the self-care. I know, like, it crosses my mind, oh, I should be watching my show, or I should be listening to music or something, and sometimes I do, but the thing is, like, it's so bad that I can't connect with it, that there's something going on. And sometimes I do fill it in with more sleep, or more eating, or whatever it may be. Sometimes I do revert to the old coping mechanisms, but I keep going back to, is this productive? In those self-reflection times. And in this past year, part of treating that wound, this axiom is very true, that helping others does help you, because it actually, and I think that was the key that was missing to me, that in these times when things go really bad, is when you're not focusing on the problems, it kind of creates a pressure valve kind of a situation, where you step away from the problem by helping other people. And sometimes in the process of trying to help other people, you have a eureka moment of how to help yourself. At the very least, a catalyst emotion of feeling good. Enough to kind of like bulldoze a weak point in that fog that is, anchoring you down. I do that a lot, of mixing analogies, but they make sense. I mean, at least to me, I hope. But anyway, all that put together is kind of basically just what I'm talking about. You're taking off the bandage, you're cleaning out whatever it has grown, emotionally, infection-wise. You disinfect it, you cut out whatever needs to be cut out that has necrotized. You put more ointment that helps it heal and keep sanitized, and you rebandaged it. And you stitch wherever you need to stitch, and you do whatever you need to do. But it's all tied together, that you're basically prioritizing yourself in all of this, and more importantly, focusing on the positive, you can say, even if it may seem delusional at some point. All in the hopes of just kind of keeping that pressure valve open, so that all that pressure in life doesn't get to you and just have you implode. That's what has helped me. And now I think at the end of this journey almost. I think I'm almost out of that proverbial tunnel. That now I just need to kind of make it a second habit, a second nature to stick to the self-care. Because that's what keeps me grounded. And it's very hard. And that was one of the things that I kind of was annoyed about people of faith, even as a person of faith, that they secluded themselves from the world, and you can't do that. Because then you have secondary consequences, that you get a skewed perspective about life and about people. But if you keep in the middle of it all, trying to focus on yourself, like I've been, that it helps. Because if you become that kind of self-conceited in that way, but not to the point that it costs somebody else, but rather in the sense of you're trying to make yourself better, to improve yourself, that you're competing against yourself, that you are, I don't know, you're just trying to live your life. I realize that prioritizing myself has helped me a lot, and growing and understanding people more, because when I'm looking at myself, I see other people too. And then I get those bouts of feeling like a total dick, that I'm like, maybe I was too hard on this person. They are not as lucky. And my mom told me a long time ago the same thing, that not everybody has the mind that I do. And even an instructor told me in high school the same thing, that you might be more ahead on a climb on a proverbial staircase, and you trying to pull people by the hair, basically. Well, I'm pulling people by the hair to your level only hurts them, and you actually too, because if they fall and you're still holding on to them, you might go tumbling down with them. So the best you can do is really just kind of live by example and focus on yourself, and just kind of, do the work, do that shadow work, that introspection, growing that, that discernment, because that will come along too, where you start to kind of look at the different situations in life, and see your grounding principles, whatever your faith may be, your beliefs, whether it's atheistic or theistic, where you look at your core values and see where you're being inconsistent and being consistent with your goals in life and your view of yourself. And in looking at that and trying to help other people, I came across these type of situations where I saw my own hypocrisy. I saw where I was feeling myself and looking like a total hypocrite to others too. And so in doing that, I started to see those blind spots that weren't apparent to me in the first time. And I think, that was kind of reflective in a lot of the work that I've been doing on TikTok, and trying to kind of share what I've been learning with other people, and sometimes being rough, being the literal scalpel in other people's wounds, of trying to dig out their own stuff. But, at the end of the day, that really shouldn't be my job. And that's another lesson that I learned too, that the best way for me to help other people is this particular format that I'm doing right now, of just writing down my journey in this self-help way, because that's all really I can do for people. I can just lay out my journey, my story, and looking at other self-help people across the world and cultures and time. This is literally the format that has helped the most to a lot more people. Sharing story, whether it's parable like those that Jesus Christ shared, or the personal stories of triumph, they all have a common thing. they are stories of overcoming. And so I guess you can say in that respect, I have finally surrendered to God, that, and I need to keep improving on it. Like I said, the self-care, which is this is part of my self-care, and sharing my journey, helping others, helps me. Like, in the sitcom Mom, Marjorie says, the meetings are medicine. That communing with other people, sharing your story, of how you survived, how you overcame your addictions, that helping each other, helps us kind of get ourselves out of our own way. And at the same time, actually helping others. So in that sense, I guess I do have to recognize that I finally do submit to God in that respect, because I think that's what He really wants from all of us, to just kind of work on ourselves and to share, the glory that comes along with that for me personally speaking, I do believe comes from God, because there was many times where I don't think I deserve His grace. And I'm very thankful that He was graceful with me and sent the different artists that exist out there, that created all of the media that that I treasure so much, because we've seen or heard any of my other previous postings, my work that I've done. The nature of my trauma taught me to be so hyper vigilant and ingrained, literally ingrained, tools to survive or outwit possible enemies or situations, that I literally did it to everything that I saw. Every show, whether it was a drama, whether it was a horror story, whether it was sitcom, a soap opera, whether it was a movie, whether it was music, a book, I took it apart. Every single concept that I constitute as myself, I thank God, because the inspiration that came across those many creators, even influencers, is just too coincidental in the way that they happen to cross my path, that it can't be chance. Like they say, once is chance, two is serendipity, 3 is a pattern, or something like that. I forget how it goes. That literally a lot of the stuff that I was going through life, I would be thinking, and it was almost as if, I guess, my mind was shaping reality, because lo and behold, things would appear. Just this morning, I realized one thing. It didn't actually fit my needs, but for the past month before I went to Mexico, I was actually thinking maybe I should be carrying a broom with me, because where I live, there's a lot of glass everywhere, and my dogs, I'm afraid that they're going to get their feet cut. So I figured I need a broom. And lo and behold, my uncle by accident ordered a 3-pack of small brooms, thinking that it was a great deal. Things like that are just too coincidental, and they happen within a day. Sometimes from one day to another, boom, there it is. And I don't even tell anybody. There's things that appear, like on TikTok and things like that sometimes make me think that maybe the systems, the algorithms, are kind of analyzing my behavior and kind of concluding things. But I'm like, they're too precise. I don't think any man-made thing can actually do these type of things. That they're literally reading my mind. Especially when things don't have to do anything with technology, that are just out and about in the world. Because a lot of the lessons too that I've come across have been just observing people in real life. And just looking at them, and I'm like, oh, I was just thinking about that. Like, I need, blah, 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 this or that. And boom, there it is. There's a person that teaches me that lesson, or offers me some resource that I need, that I was asking God for, maybe the day before, or weeks before, months before, or whatever. Um, you know, and literally, I was asking for my own collapse of my life, because before that, I was very unhappy, and I did want to kind of reform my life, and it was traumatizing, but you know, the fallout of COVID allowed me to reset my life. But now, as I'm drawing closer to the end of my healing journey and begin to actually live my life, you know, I still have to deal with some of the residual aspects of my previous self that I need to modify, integrate, or whatever the case may be. I do get stressed out, not knowing how I'm going to bring in money. Right now, I work for the county, helping my mother in whatever I can. I cook, I clean, I do errands, things like that. But at the end of the day, there is that thought in my mind that it's all contingent on her continuing to live. And her being way past her expectancy of her kidney has highlighted that. And what happened with my aunts a few weeks ago has redoubled highlighted that situation, that I need to be there for her, but at the same time I need to bring in some money. So how do I consolidate that? How do I actually achieve both things? Now recently on my trip to Mexico, I came up with an idea, but so far it hasn't panned out. But in one way or another, God has led me to know that this, me helping people, is my path. It hasn't rendered any physical fruits other than the likes and the additional people adding themselves to my followers. And so I think that's kind of what I was being prepared to. That's basically what I'm talking about, that these serendipitous moments happen in my life. I was being prepared. I was advised of what was going to happen during this phase of my healing. About, I think, the year that I met this last fellow, in thinking that I was going to run in to the previous fellow that I mentioned, I went to a local mall in Salinas where the previous fellow used to live. Something crossed my mind that I would bump into him. So I went on faith, like I've done many other times. I didn't bump into him, but it occurred to me, well, I'm here, let me just check out the movie theater, which is behind the mall, and see what they have. And I think at the time, I need to double check because give me a second. Alright, sorry about that. I have to double check because it occurred to me, and this is a double whammy, serendipitous moment. So as I was going to the theater, I actually wanted to see the first Super Mario Brothers. And this is key, and I hope I don't give too much away in this regard, because I'll explain the Super Mario Brothers later. First, I want to get to the what I was going to in the terms of this particular situation of serendipity. So I was, again, trying to bump into this romantic interest, situationship, let's call him that too, because basically that's what he was as well. But, I came to the conclusion, that's not going to happen. Let me go see Mario Brothers. So I went to the theater, and it happened that the next showing was, I think, 2 hours away. And I was like, well, I'm here already. I don't really want to go away. Let me see what else is there. So what was there was his only son. And if you've seen this, it's actually a very amazing story, because that's actually, it was basically my next assignment for me, for my life. That in so many words, the story of his only son is really the story of Ruth, I believe is her name. Hold on one second, let me double check. Oh, all right. No, it's not Ruth. It's actually Sarah, the wife of Abraham. So if you're familiar with the story of Abraham, Sarah and Abraham are trying to have a kid. They are of third age, very old people who technically cannot have kids anymore. But God presents himself before Abraham and tells him that not only is he going to have a kid, but he's going to have the seed to countless generations through this child. Once this actually comes to pass, which, by the way, Sarah, through all of this, is being tested in following her husband. Right? This was as much a test for her as much as it was for the husband. And if you look at this story, that's pretty much what it was. And it dawned on me at that moment when I was watching this movie that the next phase of my life would be just that I would be tasked with growing my own faith. And sure enough, that's what happened. Like, that's part of what I'm going through right now with this individual, my soulmate. I hope. And see, that's, I think, part of the thing too, that I'm still not sure. Part of me is hopeful, but I think at the same time I'm kind of trying to do what Sarah did in submitting to God and ultimately just leave it in his hands, whether this individual is going to be my soulmate or not. But ultimately, like I said, in the story and in my life, that would be the next chapter of my life that now is closing, and I'm starting the next chapter. That I need to continue to be faithful in whatever task I'm approaching, whether it is achieving the goal of being in a good place with my mom, because I still do have those frustration points with her, and sometimes I do snap at her still. But one of my goals has been that we get to such a good place that she can leave this world in peace, because I think that part of the reason why she's stuck around so much is because she's worried about me, and deep down, for the longest time, I think I've used that to kind of as a carrot to keep her going, to keep her alive, being a quote-unquote screw-up, just in the hopes that she would be around more. But, as I'm healing, I have realized, and I realized this before, that it's not fair to her, that, she needs rest too, that if she's sticking around for me, she shouldn't. I know she says that she's, quote, I guess in a way, addicted to life and wants to live as much as she can. But part of me does feel like she's just sticking around because she's worried about me, like any other parent would be worried about their kid. So, as I'm progressing, I want to fix myself, not only for myself, for a partner, but for her too, that I'm in a good place where, she can leave this mortal coil once and for all in peace, and know that I will be okay. But, as our time with her draws to a close, I do worry about the future. There is some things that I have, with her help, prepared for when she passes, that financially speaking, I will be okay. I do have the skills to go back to my previous line of work. I do have some stuff that I've been doing, on my spare time to kind of keep my skills, quote unquote, sharp. So I have options. But so far, everything that I've tried, it almost seems like something or someone, or maybe myself, sabotaging myself, I don't know, has kept me from bringing any of that into fruition. I started my own pet business, 2-3 years ago. Um, it was doing well, but then this presidency came along and kind of just screwed up everything. And I think that's been part of my current task. Again, going back to the faith thing, that as bad as things get, I still need to take care of myself, mentally speaking, so that I keep going in whatever I choose to take. Right now that I went to Mexico, I came up with another option of trying to teach English to people over there. So far, it's kind of floundering, but I just started, and I think I may have self-sabotage. Because, see, I think a lot of my strategies are kind of self-sabotage, knowing very, very well that I'm not setting myself up for success, you can say. And so I think that's been part of my cycle for myself, that I keep beating myself over things that, that I don't follow. And that's one of the things that I actually talked about with my therapist, that that in the past, when I went against my gut feeling, it blew up in my face, that it got so bad that, I kind of don't really trust my initial gut feeling on other things that are not specifically people directed, like business. So I've had so many sour situations with people that I ignored my gut feeling for the benefit of the doubt of them. But I think at the same time, on purpose, for knowing that they would render some sort of lesson. And they sure did. But the consequence was that, it hurt the trust in myself. And that's been one of the goals that I've been working on this past year, of trusting myself in who I trust and in what I trust. Because, again, that part of trust in my judgment and my own discernment affected the trust in my own gut feelings when it came to business. That, like in the case of this teaching English, my first initial gut feeling was to teach, kids, but there's a lot of competition. So that one I was like, I don't know. So that's how the situation would come up a lot, that I would self-sabotage myself by over-analyzing things and kind of taking myself out of the gate right from the beginning. So kind of looking back at the decision I did take with this right now, that I opted to do a more technical English for those individuals that work in industry in our area of Mexico, so far hasn't panned out. Nobody has replied. No one has paid for a course. None of that. So I think I kind of just skipped ahead too far, when in reality I needed to focus on the beginning level of English for whoever, but for adults. So I don't know. Right now I'm kind of in between, trying to decide whether I should focus on teaching beginning adults or teaching kids. Because, my time is limited, and I also have to take care of my mom, take care of my dog, and take care of myself. So I need to be smart about this. And so right now I'm kind of like, I'm still trying to strengthen that part of me, like Sarah, that is trusting in God, trusting the process, trusting myself, that things will be okay. That, the lessons I've learned so far have strengthened my discernment, my critical thinking skills in respect to myself. That I am a good business person, because I think all the past business failures have caused that self-reflection of seeing myself as, I suck at business. And the reality is, no, I don't. The pet business proved itself. I mean, there was many times where I was bringing real cold hard cash home. Maybe not in the amounts that I wanted to. And that was one of the lessons that I learned, that in terms of appreciation, of gratitude, that I was focusing on how much I wasn't getting, on the downs, that I was, in essence, stepping away from faith of my own abilities, um, and that things would be okay. That I was falling victim, or pushing myself to be a victim, in the sense that I was going along with these situations in life. And in reality, there's many people out there that started their mega businesses. They became billionaires in times of scarcity, in times when things were rough, and that I could be the next one. But, being true to my God and my faith, it's not about the money. It never was. It has never been. That's why I focus so much on trying to share my path with other people, so that they also heal themselves. And maybe, that's what I need to focus on. Just keep doing the work of sharing that with other people, and that one day the money will come along, because I put in the work. And right now, as I speak, as I dictate rather, this particular long journal entry, as my therapist and other people have mentioned, I should write a book. And, I do have dispersed entries in different formats, from, novel to kind of, esoteric analysis to, theological, and different modes of conveying my worldviews and my progress in growth as an individual. And so at some point I will probably need to start trusting myself in building a team, so that I can curate all that work into something that actually makes some damn sense to somebody. Because as it is, it's kind of just an eclectic patchwork of different works that, on the surface, they have nothing to do with each other. But from my perspective, looking at things, because that's part of my nature, and I think part of the survival skill that I learned growing up, it's just having to find the patterns in dispersed pieces of information that have, on the surface, nothing to do with each other. But if you look deep down, they totally impact each other. There are different aspects of different topics. How sociology and trauma affects our buying habits. If you look at Freakonomics, you can see things like that. How subtle things in human psyche impact how we do business, and how business impacts things like politics, right? And ultimately how that goes back to the individuals, and how it affects their self-perception and of the world. So, taking those different dispersed aspects of myself, the theologian, the esoteric, the spiritual, the scientific, and so on and on and on, how I integrate them in a written form, or in some sort of whatever mode of communication that actually makes sense to people. I don't know how that's going to even happen. But I know that it's going to happen, I guess. I don't know. I'm just basically taking life one day at a time, one bite at a time. And now as I look at my baby, Luigi, he's, I guess, getting annoyed. Not annoyed, but he's just licking his lips. Just makes me think how that old axiom says that really what we have control over is how we see ourselves, how we react to life. There's not really much more to it. That's really the only thing we have control over ourselves. So might as well work on that. And so as I go into the future, I know that I have more lessons to process, keeping the faith more so that it's second nature, being diligent in my self-care, being proactive in tackling the things that I know can and will come up and preparing for them, dealing with the setbacks as they come, and knowing that just like in the past, even the misfortunes were for a reason, that they were actually a detour to a better path. And to always, always be grateful. Okay, after I think more than an hour, let me see. Yep, I'm going slightly over an hour now. I'm going to draw that to a close, and that will be the end of this journal entry. And I will continue another day. Thank you for listening.